Hello, I'm Peter Clift, and I would like to welcome you to the March 2024 edition of the u3a podcast. With the ever lighter evenings, it feels as if spring is almost here. I, for one, certainly enjoy the light evenings, and in this edition, episode 38 of the podcast, we have lots for you to enjoy at any time of the day. One pastime you can enjoy at any time, anywhere, is a crossword, and we delve into the world of cryptic crosswords.
I would say it's really all about fun. So people do puzzles because they're fun to do.
And we find out about the hard but interesting world of a young ballet dancer.
The minute I started dancing, I knew I wanted to be one. But it was such hard work. I never realised such hard work.
And we go up and away and learn more about what the future of airline travel could be like.
I suggest to people, one day, you're going to get on an airplane and there won't be anybody up front driving anything. Oh, I wouldn't do that. Oh, no. Well, I tell you what, two things affect human behavior, pocketbook and pain. If you're going to pay half a price tag for a plane ticket without a guy, hey, I'll go. I believe that.
But firstly, let's get our feet firmly on the ground. Although in our modern crazy world, that can be difficult. However, many people find that mindfulness and meditation can be very helpful. But what are they? And what is the difference between the two? Lee Walbrook spoke to the u3a subject advisors on mindfulness and meditation, John Darwin and Mike Pugh-Pearce of Sheffield u3a, and he asked them to explain the differences and similarities between mindfulness and meditation.
So mindfulness is a much broader practice than meditation, and it has three aspects. First involves being more aware of what's happening to us and enhancing our experience of life. This is day-to-day mindfulness. Second is mindful movement. And the third is meditation, which we can think of as a more formal practice. And for that, we often take a particular position. The back is straight and we bring our attention to something in particular, which operates as an anchor to our mind. The most popular anchor is the breath, but there are others such as sounds, sensations in the body. And what we quickly learn is how unruly the mind can be. It wants distraction. And the practice involves noticing when that's happened and gently bringing the mind back to the anchor. So why do that? I think the best analogy is with physical activity. So we might, for example, go to a gym to strengthen our body and maintain flexibility. And we're maintaining and improving our muscles for the use in our everyday lives. And we can think of mindfulness as a mental muscle, which we improve with meditation. Everyone listening to this now can think of times when you've been mindful, when you've been focused on what you're doing. We don't teach people to be mindful because they already have that capacity. What we do is guide them through meditation and other practices to ways in which they can be more mindful throughout their everyday life.
Can I then ask both of you, how did you get involved in mindfulness and meditation, and what previous experience do you have in the field?
Well, for me, my introduction to meditation as opposed to mindfulness was some 30-odd years ago when I attended a course on transcendental meditation. People remember it was all the rage with the Beatles at the time. And the reason for doing that, I had a stressful job in Royal Mail. I was the district manager in Sheffield. And on advice from a friend, he said, well, why don't you try transcendental meditation? So that was 30 years ago. I then got into running, long distance running. But what I found was that I could get into a similar calm, meditative state through running. If you fast forward that, I'd retired from the local university. I ran into John and he described the course that he was developing on mindfulness-based life enhancement. I did it once and then I repeated. And in 2013, I joined John to train.
Well, I started to meditate probably around the same time as Mike, quite independently. About 35 years ago, I was, at the time, a chief officer in Sheffield City Council, and it was a stressful job. And I found that meditating each day helped me to do it more effectively and also to relate better to the many people with whom I was working. And then I stopped working full-time 15 years ago, and I decided to explore this wider canvas of mindfulness. I studied at Bangor University, and then I took the master's degree in mindfulness studies at the University of Aberdeen. And after I completed that MSc, they were kind enough to invite me to join the teaching team, which I've been doing now for 10 years. And at the same time, people in Sheffield were asking me, well, what are you up to now? You're no longer full-time working. So I mentioned to them mindfulness, and a number asked if I could introduce them to the idea. And that's when, like I said, I devised this course called Mindfulness-Based Life Enhancement, offering that free of charge. I thought it would run a couple of times, but participants told their friends, word spread, and soon I was doing it 5 times a year.
Now, you mentioned then the sessions that you're running for the u3a, and you have been doing so for the past 2 years. I wonder if you could expand on those a little and tell us, how they run, what you're trying to achieve with them, and any feedback you've had from the people who participate in those sessions.
Yes, the courses that we run, as John says, are based on the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which is a framework developed by the Economics Foundation. It's used across the NHS and in our local university. And so it's a 6-week program. We run it on Zoom, and the first 5 weeks cover the 5 elements of the framework: notice, connect, be active, give, and keep learning. And the 6th session has very much a local title. It's called the Full Monty, in which we bring together all the various elements of the program into a comprehensive framework to give to people to take forward. And in that, we focus importantly on how we can use the framework in developing approaches to self-care, in fact, creating a self-care plan. So many of the elements of the mindfulness-based life enhancement program that John has developed have been mapped onto this framework, and with the overlay of the concept of mindful aging, using all this mindfulness and meditation practice as we age, and important areas such as preventing falls, dealing with ageism itself and challenging stereotypes and challenging negative thinking.
Finally, you mentioned about the online courses. I'm assuming that you are planning to continue running them. If so, could you let us know how to find out when they are next scheduled to run and how people book themselves onto those courses?
Yes, we began the 6th running of this series of 6 sessions on the 7th of February. And our intention is that as long as there is interest, we will continue to run them. So to sign up, you simply need to log on to the National u3a website and go to Online Learning Events page and look for Mindfulness and Meditation Series. Register on that through Eventbrite, and then hopefully we will see you at a future course. As Mike mentioned earlier on, we also run regular continuation sessions. You might like to say something more about those.
We noticed in Sheffield that as well as running the mindfulness courses, people really needed support to maintain their practice, particularly their meditation and mindful movement practice. So we used to run monthly sessions. Following that model, we started what we call continuation sessions last year, and so far we've run 12. They run every month on the 3rd Thursday at 10 o'clock in Zoom. And as with our courses, information on how to book on these continuation courses can be gained from the learning events part of the u3a website. And people just have come on these without doing the courses. Some people have found, because they've come on these continuation sessions, they've gone on to actually attend the 6-week course. So it's very much another approach to supporting members of the u3a, not just on the courses, but helping them to maintain their practice and enhance their whole knowledge base to keep learning about mindfulness and meditation.
John Darwin and Mike Pierce there, and if you would like more information on their u3a course, the full details are on the u3a website. Having learnt how to relax, it's time to get the old grey matter up and running again, so here we go. Let's start then. They delight in being fiendishly difficult and do their best to lead the would-be solver down the wrong path with red herrings, whilst to the uninitiated their clues seem like gobbledygook. We're talking, of course, about cryptic crosswords that were invented in Britain nearly 100 years ago and which still remain hugely popular to this day. But what is the appeal of cryptic crosswords, and what are the skills needed to solve them? Henry Howarth has had a lifelong interest in cryptic crosswords and is both a crossword teacher and an author. He is offering a national online talk for the u3a on March the 28th, entitled Introduction to Cryptic Crosswords, as well as a series of later courses aimed at beginners. An aspiring cryptic crossword solver herself, Susie Hodges caught up with him to find out more about this puzzling pastime. She began by asking him about the aim of his talks for the u3a.
Well, each talk is different. The first talk is really to give people an idea of cryptic crosswords as a cultural phenomenon. And then the session in March is actually a taster session called Introduction to Cryptic Crosswords. And that gives people a chance to try their hand at solving and see if it's something they'd like to pursue. And that's on Thursday, March the 28th from 10 till 12 noon. And people can book online on the Learning Events page. And as well as that, I do a 6-session course called Cryptic Crossword for Beginners. So that teaches people how to solve cryptic puzzles. And the next course starts on Thursday, May the 23rd.
And what are the main tips you'd give to those who are relatively new to cryptic crosswords, like myself, for instance, to help them solve the puzzles? I mean, they're fiendishly difficult, some of them.
Okay, well, essentially, cryptic clues are written in a form of code. So they contain within them very precise instructions which tell the solver how to arrive at the answer. But you do need to learn how that code works so that you can interpret the clues. And then as well as that, there are some basic component skills that you need to develop, like being able to solve anagrams, for example.
And what first triggered your own interest in cryptic crosswords?
Well, I can remember, and basically when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandparents, and my grandfather used to do the telegraph puzzle, and so that kind of kindled an interest in it for me. And then a bit later on in my life, I played in a band after I finished at university and ended up setting a crossword for the Melody Maker during the 80s. And that was a puzzle that involved cryptic clues as well as knowledge of bands and stuff in the 80s.
In your view, what's the main appeal of doing cryptic crosswords? Is it that eureka moment that you often see written about this pastime, where you solve a clue, as you say, by cracking the compiler's coded messages?
Yes, absolutely. That's a key part of it. I would say it's really all about fun. So people do puzzles because they're fun to do.
But are there any particular skills that you really do need?
Well, first of all, I'd say at the outset, you do not need a special brain to learn how to solve cryptic puzzles, but you do need to learn how to do them. So there are no special generic skills. So when you're solving, you're going to be using deductive logic, you're going to be using your memory, accessing kind of word meanings and that kind of thing. But the learning really is about learning how the coding system works.
I read too that a lot of it is about misdirection, deliberate misdirection, isn't it? With the compiler deliberately trying to lead the would-be solver down the wrong path. Can you give us an example of a clue that illustrates that?
Well, almost all clues do really, because each clue, when you read the text, it appears to mean something, but that's actually a complete red herring. That's referred to by crossword solvers as the surface reading or the surface, and that won't lead you to the answer. Instead, what you have to do is look, as it were, for the hidden code within the clue that gives you the cryptic reading, and that gives you the very precise instructions to arrive at the answer.
Is the hobby of doing cryptic crosswords booming in Britain? I wondered whether it's more confined to the older generation, given that crosswords traditionally were found in actual paper newspapers. And as we know, the young don't tend to buy and read paper newspapers these days.
Yes, I think there's something in that. I suspect that cryptic crosswords will continue at probably at about the same level that they are today. But it's certainly true that it's one of the few things actually where older people perhaps have a bit of an advantage because they tend to have a much richer and deeper knowledge of the language.
And when it comes to, let's say, a competition setting, what's the shortest time that a world expert on solving cryptic crosswords would take to solve all the clues?
It varies enormously from person to person. Some people are quicker at solving than others, but I would say on average, probably most people who are regular solvers would expect to spend about maybe 20 minutes solving a puzzle, something like that.
Right, I've got a long way to go, I can see.
No, don't worry about that. What can happen with cryptic crosswords is people tend to get their expectations a little bit out. So many people will spend a lot longer than that. I mean, for example, I typically would take about 45 minutes to solve a puzzle. I'm not a particularly quick solver myself, really. It doesn't matter what speed really you solve at. The main thing is the kind of satisfaction and joy you get from doing it.
Yes, I've recently joined up to a cryptic crossword session in the u3a, and the lady who runs it keeps saying, you just got to keep going back to it because your brain is refreshed each time you go back in a way and you look at it in a different way.
Yes.
I think there's something in that.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, we've talked here about people who are, trying to solve these cryptic crosswords, but what about the compiler or the setter? Do they require similar skills to the solver? And typically, how long do they take to compile a new crossword?
Yeah, so in terms of the skill set, obviously they do need to be competent solvers, but setting involves a creative input that you don't have when you're solving. And in terms of the length of time, again, you need to take what people say with a pinch of salt. It's a very, very time-consuming and intensive process, setting a good quality puzzle. Probably most professional setters, for the likes of the Times and the Guardian and the Telegraph, they're probably spending about a day to do it, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. There's often jokes and puns and humour in these cryptic crosswords, and sometimes that humour can be quite saucy, shall we say, even salacious.
Yes.
Can you give us any striking examples of that?
Not off the top of my head, but the Guardian has a more liberal editorial style, and one of the setters for the Guardian, a guy called John Halpin, he sets the Guardian under the name of Paul, and he quite often includes things that many people would regard as really quite rude.
And what is your most memorable clue? Is there one that really sticks out?
That's a question that people often ask. Not necessarily, although one I particularly like is a clue that reads, 2 girls, 1 on each knee, to which the answer is patella, because it's 2 girls' names, Pat and Ella, and you have 1 patella on each of your knee. So it's just very, very simple, just a really nice clue.
Henry Howarth talking to Susie Hodges. And if you would like to know more about Henry's talk about cryptic crosswords, then, as always, details are on the u3a website. Are you a cryptic crossword fan? Well, I have to confess that I fall into the category who find them gobbledygook, but that says more about me than it does about crosswords. Now, another thing that I can't do, and probably never will, is ballet dancing. However, my 2 daughters, when they were young, like many little girls, loved ballet dancing, and again, like many, dreamed of becoming ballerinas. But what was the reality of being a ballerina really like? One person who was a professional dancer and can remember those early years at full-time ballet school nearly 80 years ago, is u3a member Anne Coburn. Val Dawson met up with Anne recently and began by asking her how her interest in ballet started.
I was at school in somewhere called West Wellow, where Florence Nightingale's buried. So I went to a local school, and 3 of us passed our 11 plus. So that enabled me to get a scholarship, which my parents could never have afforded for me to go to London. So I went into the ballet school at 10 and a half. I went into digs, and that's what my mother had to pay for.
Had you initially, when you were young, a little bit younger, felt you wanted to be a ballet dancer? Were you passionate about it? Really obsessed? Was it an obsession?
I loved it. The minute I started dancing, I knew I wanted to be one. But it was such hard work. I never realised such hard work. I remember Miss Edwards, her name was Winifred Edwards. She was lovely. But she was underneath, she was like a stiff, ballet dancer.
Can you remember what year this was?
1949. Oh,
were you thrilled?
Terrifying, actually. Leaving home,
yes,
going into digs, you know.
Were you preparing for shows then, or
no,
how did that start?
No.
That was all very basic.
Oh yes,
ballet lessons, was it?
You had to learn, and it was a grammar school education as well.
Ah, right.
So the whole school was based on. We did Velcros in the morning, which was in sort of white silk tunics and bare feet. And you imagined it was raining and you were in a forest and what would you do? And things like that, and you had to use your imagination. And we had that for an hour. So then we got dressed into a uniform and we started schoolwork. And we did schoolwork till 12 o'clock, and then we had a break for lunch. And they had a lot of spinach, I remember, an awful lot of pureed spinach. It made everything bright green.
Oh dear.
A little mashed potato, bright green mashed potato. It was not good food. But we went back to school and we did 2 hours of schoolwork until 4 o'clock, and we started dancing at 4:30. And we danced from 4:30 to 6:30. Which was a long day for a little girl.
Then you had to get home.
And then you had to get on the tube, you know, and go all the way home.
And how long did this go on for then? How many?
I was 17 and a half when I left ballet. I went into the company. And
so what ballets did you actually take part in?
Oh, so many. I can't tell you.
So you were in the chorus?
The chorus de ballet. And I did Les Partenaires as a, couple. We did a lot in Sadlerswell Theatre, the shows. I got
so can you go back to the roles that you had during that time? I mean, can you remember even the positions you were in and the ballet steps and all that? Can you?
Yes.
Can you do them? Can you do them now?
Yes, only one dance, the Little Swans.
What was your favourite ballet?
Probably Swan Lake was lovely. Giselle. When I left and Peter took me away, I went to, he got a job. He was with Raymond in London, hairdressing. And then he
used to be called Mr. Teasy Weezy.
He was the Teasy Weezy, you're right. He got Counter of the Mouse.
He did, I remember that, yes.
So, but he was there.
Were you living in London at this time?
I was there in,
So you didn't do any more dancing at all?
Yes, I did. I did. I joined the West End. I went into the West End.
All right.
And
at what age were you then?
Well, I danced, when I met Peter, I was 17 and a half. So I danced then. I was with ballet right along, for a long time. And then I went into the Dave King show for a while.
Oh, right, I remember that, yes.
And then my agent, I had a very good agent, and she said, how's your singing voice? Because I sang for the audition. And she said, I think you'd be ideal as Cinderella.
Right.
So I went to Manchester Palace with Harry Seacombe.
Wonderful.
For 29 weeks.
Oh, my goodness.
26 weeks show, and I did 3 weeks rehearsal with him. He was wonderful.
So this is the mid-50s we're talking about now,
Must be.
Roughly.
You keep up.
Yes. I think so.
Yeah. And
you liked him, did you?
Oh, he was wonderful. What a lovely man he was. And he said, you're not staying in digs for Christmas, you're coming home with me. But they weren't home, they were in a hotel. So I went to the hotel, he got me a room of my own, and
how lovely.
He was wonderful. He was absolutely fantastic. And he drove me back. He drove me to the hotel, and then he drove me back. And my birthday is on the 27th of December. And he arranged that everybody, all the staff and all the crew and everybody came.
Oh.
And he bought 2 big cakes for me and had them decorated.
Oh, how nice.
He was
lovely.
a lovely man. He really was.
Did you keep in touch with him?
Yes, I did. And I did television for a while. I did Sunday Night from Blackpool.
Oh, right. I remember that, yes.
Yeah, I did that. And I'd done a big spectacular with George Jessel, the only man, with 300 women from London. Yeah, he was an American that came over. And we went to see him on the boat coming in. And I had to cry. And I was good at crying. So I cried, and they came straight in at me with bobby soxers.
Oh, yes.
And I came straight in at me. And then we went to see it with my mother. And she stood up in the middle of the cinema, shouted, "That's out!" That's embarrassing.
Oh, proud mum, was she? Yes.
The very tough life of a professional dancer, and it's certainly not all glitz and glamour. Now, here at the U3a, we are continuing to expand our national learning sessions. One of the most recent additions is on the subject of aviation, which is led by former US Air Force pilot Don Mobley from Stowmarket U3a. He's been explaining to Joanne Watson more about the group and how he ended up in Suffolk.
My dad was a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, and when he retired, got on with United Airlines in Denver. And we're living on a little farm in Colorado, and he taught me how to fly. Two events flying around I remember most were nose-high stalls, because when you come out of that, you're pointed straight to ground. And then we'd be flying along, he'd pull the power back and say, "What are you going to do?" Forced landing. And it's like anything else. You get desensitized to it. You get used to it. At 16 years old, on the same day, I got my driver's license and my pilot license. So that was a good day.
So you ended up coming to RAF Lakenheath, which, although it's an RAF station, is actually a US military base.
Yes.
So what sort of things were you doing over here?
I was flying the F-111 in 87, fighter bomber. And then the second go was F-15E model. And then the third go, I was flying an F-4 legged desk because I got recalled active duty in 2010. The Air Force had a pilot shortage then, which they still do now. And at the time, I was a freelance pilot here on this side of the world. And I'm here to tell you, as a freelance pilot, if you don't fly, you don't eat. And in 2008, we know what happened to the world economy. And I had to go to Mumbai, India to get work. So I'm in Mumbai, and the Air Force rings up, "Hey, Don, you want to cut your hair and put your pajamas back on and come back in the Air Force?" Mumbai, Suffolk. Mumbai, Suffolk. That's no choice. And so I got recalled for another 4 years from 10 to 14 at Lakenheath for my third tour. But when I retired again for the second time, I had the notoriety of being the oldest dude on the base.
Well, you obviously have a love of aviation because you've formed this aviation group, which has now gone national. So explain what you're talking about in your group.
We're talking about airplanes. Actually, this last week, we talked about rockets. We talked about the Apollo 11 and 13. The gist of the group is, yes, to talk about any and all things aviation. We encourage members to make presentation of something they're interested with or they'd like to talk about. But what I like to pursue is either of historical significance or events that are current. For example, a year ago, right now, in the first 3 months of the year in the United States, there were 7 near-miss incidents that could have turned out a lot worse. And so I looked at those to say, okay, is there any common thread and whatnot? What's going on? Well, we're coming out of the pandemic. And in the pandemic, a lot of operators, air traffic control, flight crews, they got either retired. And now when we're coming out of the pandemic, the demand is there, but the talent and the experience are not. Because you don't train an air traffic controller overnight. You don't train a pilot overnight. And so the experience level was down relatively to meet an increased demand. And I believe that was the reason for those incidents.
And we also found doors flying off planes.
And doors popping out the side of the airplane don't do much to restore that trust, right?
I noticed on your group that you actually were looking at drones, which of course is not quite the same as aeroplanes, but is aviation of a different sort.
Artificial intelligence. You're familiar with AI, right?
Sure.
Most people are. And I live out here on the edge of Stowe Upland. Bob Porch's farm is right here. And I'm talking to a couple of farmers the other day, and I bring up this topic. I said, hey, you guys know what AI is all about? Oh, yeah, man, artificial insemination. We do that all the time. No. Artificial intelligence. I thought that was funny. But yes, one of the things I like about aviation is how technology affects this industry. There are endless uses of AI in aviation. Let's say sky's the limit, okay? But I suggest to people, one day you're going to get on an airplane and there won't be anybody up front driving that thing. Oh, I wouldn't do that. Oh, no. Well, I tell you what, whenever that time comes, not necessarily my lifetime, when the price of that airline ticket is half, because two things affect human behavior, pocketbook and pain. If you're going to pay half a price tag for a plane ticket without a guy, hey, I'll go. I believe that.
I noticed that one of your volunteer activities is with a heritage group.
This particular project that just started the 1st of January is the securing of a site at the old Bungay airfield. And they have dozens of World War II U.S. Army Air Force facilities that are intact. And most of these museums around here, the storyline is focused on 8th Air Force operations. Okay, because that's what they did. But this particular goal for this project is not only that, in addition to how did hundreds of thousands of U.S. Army Air Force personnel rotating through this part of the country during that period affect this part of the country? More the social aspect, because I still run into people all the time talking about my daddy, my granddaddy, whatever, interacting with the U.S. troops when they were here. It was a big deal. And in a month, they've garnered 4,000 people on this Facebook page or whatever site, and 14,000 pounds worth of donations toward this project. I consider myself fortunate to be living right here in the middle of all this history. And you don't have to go too far afield here to run into a disused airfield from that period, right? I also want to get opportunity to share with people the significance of what happened here 80 years ago with 8th Air Force, because, and I cite specifically in the Battle of Britain on 15 September 1940, that day, when the RAF, all four sectors, stiff-armed the German Luftwaffe coming in, they were able to push off the Germans two big waves on that day. And that changed the course of World War II. As Winston Churchill attributed, never has so much been owed by so many to so few. That was true. Because these guys jumping in those Spitfires, you got 7 and 8 hours, man, you're good. You go fight that German that's got hundreds of hours of combat time against you. And so had the Germans won the day, there would have been no 8th Air Force on this island, because 2 months later, Operation Sea Lion was going to commence and Hitler was going to invade the country.
Joe Watson talking with Don Mobley. And if you are interested in joining Don's aviation group, then please contact him at learning@u3a.org.uk, and they will forward all the relevant emails on to him. I don't know about you, but I think we deserve a rest after all that. We've taxed our brains with crosswords, learnt about the rigours of ballet dancing, and of being a pilot, although we did have a little respite with mindfulness and meditation. But, sadly, once again we've run out of time. But thank you for listening, and if you have an interesting story to tell or would like to contact the U3A podcast team, don't hesitate to get in touch. And you can do that by emailing communications@u3a.org.uk. All that remains for me to do is to thank all our guests and our presenters, Lee Wellbrook, Val Dawson, Susie Hodges and Joe Watson. And studio production was by Lee Wellbrook. But on behalf of us all, this is me, Peter Cliff, saying thank you for listening and looking forward to meeting you again next month.